Welcome to Life Stories, where every journey is a lesson in strength, resilience, and transformation. Today, we share the remarkable story of Isabella, a young girl who faced relentless bullying and isolation due to her differences. But through her intelligence, determination, and the unexpected discovery of her royal heritage, Isabella discovers her true worth and embraces her place in the world. Join us as we dive into this inspiring tale of self-acceptance, courage, and the power of believing in yourself. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story and stay inspired with more incredible journeys. Every morning, Isabella felt like a shadow passing through the crowded hallways of her school. The whispers, the stares, the giggles, all of it followed her like an invisible cloak she couldn't shed. It wasn't just the noise. It was the feeling of being seen in a way that was alienating, uncomfortable, almost as if she didn't belong in the space she was supposed to call her own. Isabella was albino. Her skin, pale almost to the point of glowing, set her apart from everyone else around her. In her school, different was not celebrated, it was something to be mocked, something to point at and laugh. The kids at school couldn't understand why she looked the way she did. And that misunderstanding often turned to cruelty. It didn't help that she was always quiet, always kept her head down, trying to be invisible to avoid their harsh words and stares. From the very beginning, Isabella felt like she was an outsider. She was adopted, but not like everyone else. At the age of 6, she had been taken in by a kind, elderly couple who welcomed her into their home. They were everything she could ask for: loving, caring, and always trying to make her feel special. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shield her from the world outside their doors. At school, things never changed. She was still the odd one out, and the kids still called her Ghost Girl. Her memories of growing up in the orphanage were a mixture of loneliness and confusion. She had been abandoned as an infant, found wrapped in old rags in a trash bin on the busy streets of New York. A kind woman had taken her to the local orphanage, where she spent the early years of her life among children who, like her, had no parents. But Isabella never truly fit in with them either. Even the other children looked at her as if she were different, as if she were from another world. She was treated with a kindness that made her grateful, but also an undercurrent of isolation that she could never shake. The people around her at the orphanage were kind, but there was always an invisible barrier that separated her from the rest. They saw her as something other, and in a way, she had come to believe it herself. She didn't know what it was like to feel normal. Growing up, she never felt like she truly belonged. When she was 6, she was adopted by a lovely couple, the Fairmonts. They were warm, compassionate people, always eager to make her feel like she was part of their family. They told her she was special, unique, and beautiful in her own way. But no matter how many times they told her, Isabella could never fully embrace those words. At school, when the kids made fun of her for being different, those words didn't seem to matter. She was special in a world where the only thing that seemed to matter was conformity. At school, the bullying started slowly but grew more intense over time. It wasn't just the cruel words, the stares, or the cruel names. It was the constant feeling of being other, of being seen as an outsider, a freak who didn't fit in. The whispers would follow her wherever she went, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore them, the sting would always linger. There was one person who made her life especially difficult: Megan. Megan was one of the most popular girls in school, always surrounded by her friends, always confident in her beauty and charm. She had a smile that could light up a room, and a voice that could captivate anyone who listened. But there was a darker side to Megan, a cruelty that Isabella knew all too well. Megan took pleasure in belittling Isabella, making her feel like less than human. She was always quick to find an excuse to make fun of Isabella, to cut her down, to remind her that she was different. It was during one of Isabella's lunch breaks when Megan and her friends approached her table. They had already been whispering about her, and now they were ready to make their move. Megan stood before Isabella, looking down at her with a cruel grin, and taunted her in front of everyone. "Hey, ghost girl," Megan sneered. "Do you use a flashlight at night or does your skin just glow in the dark?" Her friends burst into laughter, egging Megan on. Isabella's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to speak up, to tell them how much they were hurting her, but it was like her voice was trapped in her throat. Instead, she lowered her head and tried to shrink into herself, hoping they would leave her alone. But Megan wasn't done. "Why do you even bother coming to school?" Megan continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "No one wants you here. You're just weird. You're nothing more than a freak." The words stung more than anything Isabella had ever heard before. They echoed in her mind, each syllable a tiny needle digging into her heart. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be anywhere but there. And as much as she tried to ignore them, their voices stayed with her, gnawing at her confidence, eating away at her spirit. Days turned into weeks, and the bullying only got worse. Megan seemed to take pleasure in making Isabella's life miserable. She would trip her in the hallways, laugh at her homework, and come up with new ways to torment her. And with each new insult, Isabella felt more and more like she was sinking into the ground, a victim of their cruelty. The pain weighed heavily on her, and she began to wonder if there was any way out of it. One rainy afternoon, Isabella couldn't take it anymore. She found herself in the quiet solitude of the school library, her heart heavy with sadness. She sat down at a table, and for the first time in a long while, she let her tears fall. It wasn't just the pain from the bullying, it was the loneliness that had followed her for so long. The ache of never feeling like she truly belonged anywhere. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Why can't I be like everyone else? Why can't they just leave me alone?" It felt like the world was closing in around her. But amidst the sadness, there was a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that refused to die. Isabella was brilliant. Her teachers often praised her intelligence and curiosity. She was smart, driven, and hungry for knowledge. And recently, she had been selected to represent her school in a national quiz competition. It was an enormous honor. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt a glimmer of pride in herself. She couldn't help but hope maybe, just maybe, this would be her chance to prove that she was more than the cruel words that followed her, more than the ghost girl everyone saw her as. But even as she prepared for the competition, the fear of facing Megan and the other bullies loomed over her. Would they still see her as a freak? Or would her success change how they saw her? It was a question she couldn't shake. Despite Isabella's hopes, the bullying didn't stop. It continued in waves, the whispers and the snickers always following her like an unshakable shadow. Even the teachers who praised her intelligence couldn't seem to protect her from the cruelty of her classmates. There were days when Isabella would walk through the halls of her school, her head bowed low, trying to avoid the stares and laughter that followed her every step. But then, there was Megan. Megan, with her perfectly styled hair, her bright smile, and her clique of friends who followed her every command. Isabella often wondered what it would be like to have friends like that, friends who would stand by her, support her, and laugh with her, not at her. But Megan didn't want friends like that. She wanted Isabella to be the joke, the target, the one who would always be on the receiving end of cruel remarks. And Megan seemed to take a twisted pleasure in making Isabella's life miserable. It was a typical day when Megan approached her again. Isabella was walking to her locker, her books clutched tightly to her chest, when she felt the all-too-familiar sting of Megan's voice cutting through the air. Well, if it isn't the ghost girl herself," Megan said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you going to shine like a light bulb in the dark again? Or is it just the fluorescent lights that make you glow?" Her laughter echoed in the hall, joined by the giggles of her friends. Isabella's face flushed red. She could feel the heat of embarrassment rising in her cheeks. She wanted to retort, to tell Megan to stop, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt small, powerless, and invisible all at once. The laughter continued, ringing in her ears like an endless, painful chorus. "What's the matter, ghost girl? Cat got your tongue?" Megan taunted, stepping closer, her eyes gleaming with delight as she watched Isabella shrink further into herself. Isabella's heart raced, her mind spinning with frustration and hurt. She wished she could stand up to Megan, show her that she wasn't afraid, that she wasn't the helpless target Megan thought her to be. But in that moment, all she could do was lower her head and retreat, hoping that Megan would lose interest and leave her alone. But Megan never did. She was relentless, always finding new ways to humiliate Isabella, whether it was tripping her in the hallways, making fun of her homework, or spreading rumors about her behind her back. Megan was a constant presence in Isabella's life, a cruel reminder of how different she was from everyone else. As the weeks wore on, Isabella's confidence continued to erode. She began to dread going to school every morning, knowing that it would be another day of insults and mockery. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't outrun it. And no matter how hard she tried to hide her feelings, the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. One afternoon, as Isabella sat alone in the school cafeteria, trying to eat her lunch in peace, Megan and her friends walked by, as they always did. Laughing and talking loudly, Megan's eyes landed on Isabella, and a wicked grin spread across her face. "Hey, ghost girl. I hope you're not eating glow-in-the-dark food," Megan said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. The girls around her giggled, and Isabella felt the familiar sting of humiliation. She wanted to stand up for herself. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to tell them how much their words hurt, how they made her feel like she didn't matter. But instead, she sat there in silence, pushing the food around on her tray, pretending that it didn't bother her, even though it hurt more than anything. But it wasn't just the bullying that weighed on Isabella's heart. It was the constant feeling of being an outsider, of never quite fitting in. No matter how many times her adoptive parents told her that she was special, that she was loved, Isabella couldn't escape the feeling that she was different, that she didn't belong in the world around her. At night, when she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, Isabella often wondered if she would ever find a place where she truly felt at home. She wondered if she would ever find people who accepted her for who she was, who didn't see her as the ghost girl but as Isabella, the smart, funny, kind girl who had so much to offer. One day, after another cruel encounter with Megan, Isabella retreated to the quiet corner of the school library. She had grown tired of pretending that everything was fine, tired of smiling through the pain. She sat at one of the tables, her face buried in her hands, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to cry. The tears came in waves, each one a release of all the hurt and frustration that had been building inside her. It felt as though the weight of the world had finally come crashing down on her, and she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her heart ached with loneliness, and she whispered softly to herself, "Why can't I be like everyone else? Why can't they just leave me alone?" As the tears fell, Isabella didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make it stop, how to change the way people saw her. She had spent so long trying to fit in, trying to make herself invisible, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be proud of who she was. But in that moment, as she sat alone in the library, she felt a spark of hope. She remembered her teacher's praise, the way they always admired her intelligence and curiosity. She was smart. She was capable. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella realized that she didn't need to change to fit in. She just needed to be herself. And that spark of hope grew brighter when she received a letter. Isabella had been selected to represent her school in a national quiz competition. It was an incredible honor, a chance for her to showcase her knowledge and prove that she was more than just the ghost girl they saw her as. Isabella was terrified. She didn't know what it would be like to stand on a stage, to be in the spotlight. But for the first time, she had something to look forward to. She had a chance to prove to herself that she was more than the cruel words and the stares. And maybe, just maybe, it would help others see her differently too. Isabella had always been a quiet girl, content with her books and studies. But the quiz competition was different. It was her moment. A chance to escape the endless mockery. To prove that she wasn't just the albino girl in the corner the ghost people whispered about. This competition wasn't just an academic exercise, it was her chance to shine. To show the world that she was more than the sum of the insults and hurtful comments she had endured for years. But as much as she wanted to feel excited, there was still a part of Isabella that was terrified. Her classmates, especially Megan, had a way of reminding her that she didn't belong. She was different. And in their eyes, that difference made her less. What would they say when they saw her on national television? Would they mock her even more? Or would they finally see her as someone worthy of respect? The fear gnawed at her every day. But she had to push it aside. She had worked too hard to get here. The quiz competition was an opportunity she couldn't afford to waste. So, she immersed herself in preparation. Night after night, she pored over her textbooks, read articles, and watched videos. Anything to help her sharpen her knowledge. It was exhausting. But it was a welcome distraction from the constant teasing. It gave her purpose. It gave her a reason to believe in herself again. Despite the late-night studying and the constant pressure to perform, Isabella found herself with a growing sense of pride. Her adoptive parents were incredibly supportive, and every time they saw her practicing or reviewing material, they reminded her how amazing she was. Her mother often told her, "You're so smart, Isabella. You're going to show them just how special you are." Her father would give her a reassuring smile and say, "You've got this, sweetheart. No one can beat you at this." Those words stayed with Isabella, especially on the days when she felt like giving up. They were the anchor that kept her grounded, reminding her that she wasn't just the ghost girl or the girl who was always made fun of. She was Isabella, a bright, talented young woman who deserved more than the cruelty she faced at school. On the day of the competition, Isabella stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her shirt and trying to calm her nerves. Her heart raced with excitement, but there was still a flutter of fear in her chest. She couldn't help it. What if she messed up? What if she froze under the pressure? It was a national competition. She had never done anything like this before. When she walked into the studio, the lights seemed to shine too brightly, and the noise of the crowd buzzed in her ears. Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. But she quickly pushed it away. She had made it this far, and she wasn't about to let fear take away this opportunity. Her fellow competitors smiled at her, offering polite greetings, but Isabella barely heard them. She was too focused on the stage ahead, on the questions that would soon come her way. As the quiz began, Isabella felt her nerves ease. The questions were difficult, but her mind was sharp, and she answered them with confidence. For the first time in a long while, she felt in control. She wasn't the girl who couldn't stand up for herself, the girl who was taunted for being different. She was Isabella, the student who had worked hard, who knew the answers, who could stand tall in the spotlight and not flinch. With each question she answered correctly, Isabella felt a new surge of pride. Her heart swelled as she realized that she was excelling, that all the hard work and effort had paid off. And as the competition went on, she could see the audience's interest growing. They weren't staring at her skin anymore, they were watching her mind at work, admiring her knowledge and determination. But there was one person who wasn't just watching her for her intelligence. In the royal palace, far from the competition, David, the royal butler, was watching with a keen eye. He leaned forward, squinting at the screen as Isabella's image appeared on the large television. Something about her caught his attention, a small, faint mark on her neck. It was a mark that David recognized instantly. It was the royal tattoo. The same mark that had been given to every child of the Laurie royal family upon birth. David's heart skipped a beat. He had been searching for the missing princess for years. And now, there it was, a clue. A sign that the lost princess of the Lori kingdom might not be lost after all. His eyes never left the screen as Isabella answered the next question with ease. Her brilliance. Her grace. And the mark on her neck, it was undeniable. This was her. This was the princess they had been searching for all these years. David rushed to the king and queen, his heart racing with excitement and disbelief. He quickly explained what he had seen. And the queen's face filled with astonishment and hope. Could it really be their granddaughter? The princess who had disappeared so many years ago? The queen clutched her chest, overcome with emotion. The search for Isabella had always weighed heavily on their hearts. And now it seemed that fate had brought her back to them. Meanwhile, Isabella was still focused on the quiz. The audience's admiration grew as she continued to answer question after question. And with each passing moment, she felt more powerful than she ever had before. She wasn't just answering questions, she was proving to herself that she was worthy of respect. Worthy of admiration. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Isabella's heart swelled with pride on the quiz show, the tension behind the scenes was building. David, the royal butler, was still reeling from his discovery. He had seen the unmistakable mark on Isabella's neck, the royal tattoo that every member of the Lori royal family was given at birth. It had been years since the royal family had lost their beloved granddaughter, and they had never truly given up hope of finding her. But now, with that mark, David was certain. He rushed to the king and queen's chambers, his heart pounding in his chest. The queen looked up in surprise as he burst through the door. His face flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I believe I've found her. I believe I've found the missing princess." The queen froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had always clung to the hope that one day their lost granddaughter would return. But she had resigned herself to the idea that it was an impossible dream. The car accident that had taken the lives of their son and his wife had also stolen their daughter-in-law's young daughter, leaving the royal family devastated. For years, they had searched for any trace of her, but nothing had ever materialized. Until now. David explained everything to the king and queen, describing Isabella's appearance and the mark on her neck. The queen's hands trembled as she reached for the letter that had been sent to them about the quiz competition. She hadn't thought much of it at first, after all. Who would have known that a young girl competing on a national stage might be connected to them? But now, it seemed as if fate had intervened. "Do you think it's truly her?" the king asked, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm certain of it," David replied. "The mark on her neck is the same one that is passed down to each child born into the royal family. It's unmistakable." The queen's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "After all these years, could it really be? Could our granddaughter be out there, somewhere, waiting for us to find her?" The king stood up, his face resolute. "We must go to her. We must confirm this. If she is our granddaughter, we have to bring her home. We've waited too long." With a plan in place, the royal family moved quickly. The next morning, a small royal entourage was dispatched to the school where the quiz competition had taken place. Rumors began to spread like wildfire among the students and faculty. The sudden visit from the royal family raised many questions. Why would the king and queen of Lori come to a school? Was there a special announcement to be made? Some students even speculated that it might have something to do with the young prince, who had recently returned from his studies abroad. But Isabella had no idea what was coming. She had just returned to school, hoping that her success in the competition might make her life a little easier. Perhaps, she thought, her classmates would see her differently now, that she had accomplished something great. But her hopes were quickly dashed when Megan began tormenting her again. "So, the ghost girl thinks she's special now?" Megan sneered, watching Isabella walk through the hallway. "What? Are you expecting royal treatment after that quiz thing?" Isabella's heart sank. She had hoped that her success would bring some relief. But instead, Meghan's cruelty remained unchanged. Isabella's legs felt heavy as she walked through the hall. Her hopes of acceptance shattered once more. Just then, a voice came over the intercom, calling Isabella to the principal's office. Her stomach twisted in nervous anticipation. What could this be about? Was she in trouble for something? Had she done something wrong? When she arrived at the principal's office, Isabella was stunned to find a group of elegantly dressed people waiting inside. Her adoptive parents standing among them. And standing in the center of the room, with a kind and graceful expression on her face, was none other than Queen Elizabeth Fairmorn. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the Queen, unsure of what was happening. How could this woman, who looked so regal and dignified, be here? Her adoptive parents smiled at her with warm, reassuring expressions. But Isabella felt frozen, unable to speak. The Queen stepped forward, her eyes filled with curiosity and warmth. "Isabella," she said gently. "Are you Isabella?" Isabella nodded, her voice lost in her throat. She couldn't believe what was happening. The Queen was here for her. She turned to her adoptive parents for reassurance. And they smiled encouragingly, as if they knew something Isabella didn't. The Queen's gaze softened, and she glanced toward David, who gave a small nod of confirmation. "Isabella," the Queen began, "we have been searching for you for many years. You are the granddaughter of the King and Queen of the Laurie Kingdom." Isabella's head spun as the words sank in. She couldn't process it. Princess? Granddaughter? It didn't make sense. She was just Isabella. The girl who had been abandoned in a trash bin as a baby. The girl who had never fit in anywhere. The Queen stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Many years ago, we lost you in a tragic accident. We thought we had lost you forever. But now, seeing you here, I believe that fate has brought you back to us." Isabella felt a strange mixture of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. A princess? How could she be a princess? She was just a girl. Someone who had never belonged anywhere. The Queen reached out and placed a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "You are special. Isabella. You've always been special. Even if you didn't know it. You are part of something much bigger than yourself. And now it's time for you to understand who you truly are." Isabella stood there, stunned, unable to speak. She had never felt like she belonged anywhere, so how could she possibly belong in a royal family? How could she fit into a world so different from the one she had known? But in that moment, as she looked at the Queen, something deep inside her began to stir. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, something that would change her life forever. The days that followed that moment in the principal's office were nothing short of a whirlwind for Isabella. She had been told that she was the granddaughter of the King and Queen of Laurie, a family she had never known. The revelation had shaken her to her very core. And yet, it felt unreal. How could she be royalty? How could she, the girl who had spent her life in an orphanage, the girl who had been mocked and bullied, possibly be the missing princess of a royal family? Her mind was a blur of confusion, and her heart was heavy with doubt. She had spent so much of her life feeling like an outsider, and now she was being told that she belonged to a world so far removed from her own. Despite the Queen's kind words, Isabella felt an overwhelming sense of disbelief. She didn't know how to process it, how to make sense of this sudden shift in her life. But amidst the confusion, there was something else that stirred within her, a deep, quiet hope. Could this be the change she had longed for? Could she finally find a place where she belonged? The idea of being part of something bigger, of having a family that loved her, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Over the next few days, Isabella found herself adjusting to the surreal reality of her new life. The royal family had arranged for her to stay at the palace, and she was introduced to her new surroundings, grand, opulent, and filled with a sense of history that took her breath away. The palace was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were adorned with beautiful tapestries, portraits of kings and queens from generations past, and the rooms were filled with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. Isabella's new life was filled with strange and overwhelming moments. She was shown to her suite of rooms, bright and elegant, with soft colors and luxurious furniture. It was all so different from the small, modest room she had shared with her adoptive parents. Here, she was treated like royalty, with servants offering her anything she could possibly need. But even as the staff treated her with great respect, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in this world. She had always been an outsider, and now she was expected to step into a role she didn't understand. She wasn't sure how to behave, how to walk, how to talk. Everything seemed so foreign, so overwhelming. It was during one of her first days at the palace that she met Miss Lara, the royal family's etiquette instructor. Miss Lara was a poised and professional woman, always impeccably dressed, with a clipboard in hand and a gentle but firm manner. She greeted Isabella with a polite bow, her voice filled with respect. "Good morning, Your Highness," she said. "I'm here to guide you through your lessons in royal duties and etiquette." Isabella, feeling awkward and out of place, hesitated. "Please, just call me Isabella," she said softly, her voice lacking the confidence she wished she could muster. Miss Lara smiled warmly. "As you wish, Isabella. It is my job to help you understand your responsibilities as a member of the royal family. We will begin with lessons in walking gracefully, addressing dignitaries, and dining etiquette." Isabella nodded, her stomach twisting with nerves. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but she didn't have a choice. She had to learn, had to adapt to this new life. As Miss Lara began teaching her the basic principles of royal behavior, Isabella felt a mix of frustration and determination. It was harder than she expected. She stumbled during the lessons on walking with poise, and she struggled with the complex greetings she was supposed to use when addressing important people. Every time she made a mistake, she felt more self-conscious, more like the awkward girl she had been at school. But Isabella wasn't one to give up easily. She had faced far worse challenges before: the bullying, the loneliness, the feeling of being different. Each of those experiences had shaped her into someone who could push through the discomfort, someone who refused to let fear hold her back. She reminded herself that she had worked hard to get here, that she had earned this chance. Slowly, Isabella began to improve. Her movements became more graceful, her posture straighter, and her confidence began to grow. Miss Lara was patient with her, offering encouragement and praise whenever Isabella made progress. Each lesson, though difficult, brought her closer to the woman she was meant to be. Despite the challenges, Isabella found herself growing more comfortable in the palace. She was surrounded by people who treated her with respect, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly seen. The royal family's kindness, their acceptance, made her feel valued, not for her appearance, but for who she was inside. Still, there was one person who couldn't seem to let go of her old ways: Meghan. News of Isabella's true identity had spread quickly, and Meghan, who had once tormented Isabella at school, suddenly wanted to be her friend. She sent her messages, acting as though they had always been close. One afternoon, Meghan managed to visit the palace, claiming that she was there to congratulate Isabella. She arrived with a sweet smile and a gift, pretending to be thrilled for her friend. But Isabella saw through her act. Meghan was only interested in Isabella's title, in the idea of being associated with royalty. Meghan wasn't interested in Isabella as a person, only in what her newfound status could bring her. Isabella was polite, as she had learned in her lessons, but inside, she felt a surge of anger. Meghan's cruelty had hurt her so many times, and now here she was, pretending to be her friend just because Isabella was a princess. "I appreciate your kindness, Meghan," Isabella said, her voice steady. But I think I'll be attending the royal ball with my true friends. Meghan's smile faltered. But she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing in a forced smile. Of course, she said. Just thought I'd ask. As Meghan left, Isabella felt a quiet sense of pride. She no longer needed Meghan's approval. She was learning that her worth wasn't tied to what others thought of her, and that she didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. That evening, as Isabella prepared for the royal ball, she looked in the mirror and saw something new. She didn't just see the awkward, lonely girl she had once been. She saw a young woman who had faced her struggles, who had embraced her true self, and who was ready to step into a new life. She wasn't just a princess by title. She was a princess by heart. Someone who had fought for her place in the world and had earned it. The night of the royal ball arrived with a mixture of excitement and dread. Isabella stood before her full-length mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the delicate fabric of her gown. The dress shimmered under the soft lighting of her room, its intricate beadwork catching the light in a way that made her feel like she was stepping into a world far removed from everything she had known. The gown was fit for a princess, elegant, refined, and, for Isabella, completely foreign. It felt like a dream, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Her hair was styled in soft curls that framed her face. And her jewelry, a simple but stunning set of diamond earrings, completed the look. As she gazed at her reflection, Isabella barely recognized the girl staring back at her. The transformation was almost too much to process. Just weeks ago, she had been the lonely, bullied girl who felt invisible. And now, she was about to walk into a ballroom filled with royalty, dignitaries, and people who would treat her like she belonged in this world. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She had worked so hard to get here, and tonight was supposed to be a celebration. But with every step she took toward the ballroom, a part of her still hesitated. Could she really belong in this world? Could she really be the person she had always dreamed of becoming? The fear of not measuring up, of being out of place, clawed at her heart. The Queen and King of Lori were already in the ballroom when Isabella entered, their smiles warm and encouraging. As she walked in, the chatter in the room paused, and every eye turned to her. The whispers she had been accustomed to were no longer full of cruelty, but rather curiosity and admiration. She wasn't the girl they used to call names, she was Isabella, the young woman who had proven herself through her intelligence, her strength, and her kindness. She was more than just the ghost girl from school, she was royalty now. And she was proud of who she had become. But even as Isabella felt the weight of the room's attention, she knew that this wasn't just about her. It was about all the girls who had been made to feel small, who had been dismissed and ignored because of their differences. Isabella had been one of them. And now, she had a chance to make sure that others like her would never feel alone again. She took her place in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the royal family and dignitaries from all over. The room buzzed with excitement as the King and Queen stood beside her, announcing that she would now be formally recognized as the Princess of Lori. The applause that followed was loud and heartfelt. And for a moment, Isabella felt a wave of warmth wash over her. The world was no longer a place that viewed her as different or less than anyone else. She was here. She was valued. And she was part of something bigger. Yet, even as she stood there, she couldn't help but glance around the room, searching for familiar faces. There, in the corner of the ballroom, was Meghan. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Isabella with envy and resentment. Isabella could feel her presence like a shadow in the background, a reminder of the bullying she had endured. But this time, Isabella wasn't afraid. She didn't need Meghan's approval, or anyone else's. For that matter, she had found her place in the world, and that was enough. As the night wore on, Isabella found herself laughing and dancing with her new friends. The girls she had invited to the ball, the ones who had been bullied and pushed aside just like she had. They were the quiet ones, the shy ones, the ones who had always sat at the back of the room. But tonight, They were all shining. They were part of something beautiful. Something that made them feel seen and appreciated. Isabella had invited them because she knew what it felt like to be left out. To be ignored. She wanted them to know that they were just as important as anyone else in the room. The royal ball was filled with laughter and joy. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella didn't feel like an outsider. She danced freely. Her movements graceful and confident. As if she had shed all the insecurities that had once held her back. The weight of the past, of the bullying and the loneliness, faded into the background as she embraced her new life. She was no longer the girl who felt like she didn't belong. She was Isabella, the princess of Lori, a young woman who had found her strength and was ready to use it to make a difference. But as the night drew to a close, Isabella's thoughts turned inward. She had worked so hard to get here. And she had come so far. But she knew that this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges ahead. There would still be people who tried to bring her down. People who doubted her. People who couldn't understand her. But Isabella was no longer afraid. She had learned that being true to herself, embracing her worth, and standing tall in the face of adversity was what truly made her royalty. And as she looked around at the people who had accepted her, who saw her for who she truly was, Isabella knew that she had finally found her place in the world. She had found her family, her friends, and most importantly, herself. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her heart. As the final dance of the evening began, the king and queen led Isabella to the center of the ballroom. The crowd applauded as they placed the royal crown on her head, and Isabella felt a surge of pride. This was her moment, her victory, not just as a princess, but as the girl who had faced her fears, who had never given up, and who had finally embraced her worth. For the first time, Isabella truly felt like a princess, not because of the crown on her head, but because of the strength in her heart, the love she had for herself, and the knowledge that she had found her place in the world. As the night came to an end, Isabella stood on the balcony of the palace, gazing out at the starry sky. She had found her place in the world, a place where she was valued and loved for who she truly was. No longer the shy, bullied girl. She had blossomed into a confident young woman who had embraced her true identity. Isabella had faced countless challenges, but each one had made her stronger. She knew that her journey was far from over. But for the first time, she felt at peace with who she was. As she smiled to herself, she whispered, "I'm not just a princess by title. I'm a princess in my heart." Thank you for following Isabella's journey. To stay inspired and hear more life-changing stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more videos that will inspire and motivate you.